Good morning. I'm going to attempt to put together a relatively short video that discusses the assignment that you have for this week and next week, which is the proposal. This is one of many times that I've tried to get this video going, so I hope it works. That's why I've been so late. As you can see from the front slide here, everything in this particular presentation, and indeed everything for this assignment, comes from Chapter 10 of our textbook. So if you don't have the textbook, you can go to the library and Xerox the parts of Chapter 10 that you want. You can copy them, save it as a file, and that way you have it. Here on the front page, just to introduce the idea of proposal, I've picked what probably most people think of when they think of proposals, and that is proposals of marriage. And up here in the upper left-hand corner, if you're interested, I posted the prices a few years ago for proposing at a ballpark, just in case you want to propose to someone at Busch Stadium, or God forbid you're a Cubs fan and you want to go to Wrigley Field. This will give you an idea of what the prices are. So anyway, that's why that's there. This is not that kind of proposal. Although it is a little similar, because you have to have somebody read the proposal and then say yes. If they say no, then of course it means there's something wrong with your proposal. I have never seen anybody in a ballpark turn down a proposal, but maybe those are the ones they just don't show on TV. Here's the overall process. The first thing you have to do, and this is what's due in class on Friday, is choosing a problem. What exactly is the topic that you want to address? The second step is to research that problem and figure out what kind of solutions there are. 99% of the problems that you have are ones that other people have dealt with in other places. And so it shouldn't be too difficult if you do a little bit of Googling around to find sources that will help you with that research. You have to, third, present the problem so that readers see that it exists and see that it's a serious issue, that it affects more than just you. You're not just whining about it. The fourth step is to find a solution that would help solve the problem and could be implemented without being too costly or time consuming. This is why if you propose, for instance, that we immediately stop making gasoline-powered cars and go to all-electric, or vice versa, those are enormously complex. They sound really simple, but they're not. They're also very expensive, and they're very time-consuming. So please stay away from issues like that, only because they're just simply too hard for you to do in the time that we have. The fifth step is to figure out what objections people might have, and then also to figure out what kind of alternative solutions there might be. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. And then you organize it so that it's clear, logical, and convincing. And this is all language that comes from page 508 in our textbook. Here's kind of a restatement of the same list with a couple of caveats. One is to consider the readers. You always have to think about your audience. What do they know? What do they not know? What do they need to know? And where do they stand? What's their relationship with the topic? And that can sometimes be easy, like if you're writing about, let's say, parking at Merrimack. You know, many people go to college, many people have jobs that require them to drive. They're used to parking lots as a thing because they use them every day. So you don't maybe have to do as much work explaining what a parking lot is to your audience as you might have to do if you were, say, writing about the registration process that we use at Merrimack. Okay. One of the ways to think about this is also to come up with a working thesis. That is, what exactly is the problem you want to solve? Why do you want to solve it? And what's the best solution? And we'll talk a little bit about this later. But you should go into this with some idea of how you think it should be fixed. For many folks, this is the hardest part, choosing a problem. And so I've listed out some topics that other students have used. I've had essays about work. I've had essays about St. Louis Community College. Maybe one of the issues you could look at, let's say if you're in a profession that requires a license in the state of Missouri, you could certainly look at licensing rules. These are things that a lot of business groups and a lot of public policy groups talk about. Do we have too many rules for licensing? Do they get in the way of competition? Do they get in the way of free enterprise? And these are complicated questions, but you could certainly focus on one aspect of that and propose perhaps a different licensing system if you think that's important. Speaking of licensing, I've never had anybody write about this, but I always wish somebody would, and that is our current system of using licensing offices for driver's licenses and license plates. These guys are not employees of the state government. They're employees of a private contractor that operates this system for the state. No other state, so far as I know, uses that process. And so if you ever wonder why you get frustrated at a licensing office, it may be because you're dealing with a private company that's performing an activity that normally is done by the state. Okay, so choose something small, something manageable, something you can deal with in 4 or 5 pages, but also a problem that's connected maybe to you personally. Okay, and of course you can always use your cause and effect paper, you can use your phenomena paper as perhaps a basis for this. Here's something that is the second point that I think a lot of folks don't always take seriously, and that is you have to prove the problem's existence and you have to prove that it's a serious one. If you're dealing with something like the way we do car registrations or pay sales taxes in Missouri, I think most of us would probably say, yeah, this is a problematic system. But if it's something at Merrimack, you have to prove that, you know, the 8,000 students or 10,000 students that we have, whatever number we have at Merrimack, everybody has to go through this process. And it's time consuming and it doesn't necessarily produce the results that we want. Okay. So you can think about your topic in terms of how easily can I prove the seriousness of it? Okay. How do I convince people that this is something real? Part of that is to consider the audience or consider your readers. And again, these are all terms from the textbook. Okay. And so one of the ways to do that is to say, well, we'll just assume you're part of this group, that it's really important. Some people in your group may have the power to affect a change. And this is if you decide that you're going to write something about the college that you want to get fixed. You can think about, well, who should it go to? Should it go to the vice chancellor for education, who worries about class scheduling and what courses are offered and who teaches them, and then where those courses are taught? Or do you go to vice chancellor for students, which is the person who worries about admissions and registration, financial aid, student conduct, things like that. So you have to think about who this is going to go to. If it's a broader audience, think about a broader audience. Assume that if the proposal that you have in mind were simple, we would have implemented it already. So obviously there's going to be resistance. Everybody is invested in the status quo. And so you have to kind of overcome that resistance. Okay. But at the same time, you know, people have certain shared values. We want things to be efficient. We want things to be organized. We want things to be simple. And so if you focus on those kinds of values that people have in common, you can help move your audience in the direction that you want them to go. Okay. Finding a solution sometimes is complicated and sometimes it's not. But one of the best ways to do it is look for the same problem at other places where it's been solved and use one of those models as your model for your particular solution. There's nothing wrong with that. As I said earlier, most of the problems that we run into are ones that all kinds of people run into. Other places, other institutions, other companies, other colleges might have come up with ways of dealing with this that we just simply haven't thought of. Okay. And this last point about seeing a solution as part of a larger system, like if you decide you're worried about academic advising, well, that goes into registration and how can completion rates and whether people transfer and stuff like that. And so if you put your solution in the context of this larger thing about college completion, student success, those are the kind of things that can help you move your solution across the finish line. Okay, researching. Again, Google is our friend in this. You all know how to do that now. Some of you are pretty competent at it. You can always ask me for help. The harder part is getting data about the college if you pick a college problem or from the state government. And so I can help you with that, but you have to tell me that you need that kind of help pretty soon. So once you pick a topic and do some Googling, please send me a note or call me or text me or something and ask for advice, and I'll see what I can do. The more specific your numbers are, the better. People love numbers. People love specific numbers. and the more of those you can employ in your paper in a way that makes sense, the better off you're going to be. As I mentioned, many times the problem that you have has been solved elsewhere, so it's helpful to include that. And then again, asking for help. Um, I forgot, these are slides that I was modifying from an earlier one. We don't have a library orientation. We just don't have time for it. So talk to me, use the um, call, text a librarian feature that's in the library webpage, or you can go to the Merrimack Library on Saturday and Sunday, and you can meet with a reference librarian if that works for you. I should have taken this out. I apologize. Support is more than just data. It's a way of saying, if we follow this process, this is what's going to happen. And the more specific you are in what's going to happen, the better off you're going to be. You can't just say, well, this is better, or it's different, or it's faster. You're going to have to be able to make those points with data, with precision. At the same time, parts of your essay are going to be speculative because we don't really know what's going to happen in the future. So I think it's important to acknowledge that. And you can say, well, we don't know everything that's going to happen. We do know that this and this and this are going on. And like for instance, in the licensing office example I mentioned earlier, one of the things that's going to happen in 2025 is when you buy a car, you're going to be able to roll your sales tax, your Missouri sales tax, into your car payment, which happens in 49 other states that you're just done at the dealership. Missouri doesn't do that for a variety of reasons. And as of 2025, the law has changed, and now that you're going to be able to do that. So reduce one trip to the licensing office. So we know that there's an effort to make a change in that part of the licensing world. Are there other changes that your solution fits into that might help us with that process? And again, the last thing is you never want to over or under promise. You don't want to say, well, this might work for a few people, but not for everybody. So it may not, that's not a very good rhetorical position for you to take. And you don't want to over promise. You can't say, oh my God, this is the best thing since sliced bread. It's going to fix everything. Everybody in the state's going to be happy. You just can't do that because it's just simply not true. Alternatives, you're going to have at least one in your paper. And many times that's going to be the status quo. It's going to be, how do we do things now? How do things get done in the current time? And so that might be something to include relatively early on as part of your problem statement and say, here's what we do now. And then when you get to this alternatives part, you can say, well, clearly, my idea is going to change the status quo in these different ways. And that might be enough to carry the day. If you have an example, as I said earlier, of where this has been solved somewhere else and it's working, then you might want to include that as an alternative. Don't make ones up that aren't going to work, but you're just throwing them in to try to lengthen the paper. Don't do that. At least the status quo you should address. There may be multiple ways that something could be done. And if that's the case, then mention maybe 2 or 3 of those that seem really important to you. But don't go overboard with alternatives. The working thesis that I mentioned at the beginning, you may not know what that is until you're relatively far along in the paper, but you could always start with your topic and where you think we ought to end up. You may have an idea that you feel is going to work. You're going to do some research to make sure that that idea is going to work. And that will become part of your working thesis. But the idea is that from the beginning of this topic, you really should have an idea of where you're going. And that's going to help you focus your research and focus your paper. One of the ways to organize a paper, and this comes from page 508 in our textbook, is with these 4 things. Here's this problem. Here's my solution, and then here's my support for that solution, and then here are alternatives. And that's one place you can discuss the status quo. And then you add an introduction of some kind. Maybe it's personal. Maybe it's you say, well, when I registered for classes at Merrimack, it took me 5 days. And you explain why. Maybe that's the introduction. And then the conclusion, you come back to that and say, if we adopt this proposal, it's going to make everybody's life much simpler. We'll be able to register in an afternoon or an hour, and everybody will be happier because it takes up less of their time. Okay. So think of this as the model for your structure. Okay, organizing these things is always tough. But if you think about dividing your paper into problem, solution, support for the solution, and consideration of alternatives, and you can even do this with subheads, I should mention. You can use subheads in your paper if you want to do that. You can even number this. You could make it a list if you wanted to. In fact, I'll talk about that on the next slide, I think. This is in the assignment sheet that suggests that if you don't want to write a standard paper, you don't have to. You can create a podcast if you think you're pretty good at that. You could create a narrated PowerPoint, which is kind of sort of what I'm doing. There's a narration feature in PowerPoint. I'm using a program called ScreenPal for most of these videos. But PowerPoint itself will let you create a narrated file. You could create a video, probably a better one than what I've put together. You can create an infographic if you're pretty good with graphic design stuff. You could even do a mock-up of a Kickstarter GoFundMe page if you think you could do that. You can't create a real page because they have rules about that, but you can certainly create a model using PowerPoint or using Microsoft Word or some other program to help you put that together. And I have added some links in for what's an infographic and how to use PowerPoint better into our page. The last thing is, remember, this is not an ad. You're not saying, oh my God, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and convincing people the way that advertising does by not talking about alternatives, not talking about real data, that kind of stuff. So you're advocating a position as a rational human being that recognizes that the status quo is working, but it's not working as well as it should be. Okay, that's kind of the point of view that you need to take. Okay. So this is a mistake a lot of students do, is they suddenly fall in love with their proposal and they say, oh my God, we have to do this and here's the best way. And they just focus on all the positives. They never talk about the negatives. They don't talk about the status quo, and they don't really consider alternatives. Don't do that. You have to have all those components in your paper. Think of the structure again, or your paper, or whatever you decide to do. So you've got to think about problem, solution, support for the solution, and alternatives. Those four elements have to be there no matter what. Okay. How much emphasis each of those gets might vary from topic to topic, but all four have to be there. Okay. Here's the timing line for this. Friday, the 4th of October is when your proposal is due. The draft is due Friday the next week. You need to meet with me in person or via Zoom between 4 and 11 October, and you need to get in touch with me and work out a time. Do not delay on this thing. Okay, and the more of your draft you have done, the better off you're going to be. The final is due Sunday, 13 October. Okay. Don't hand it in after that because I won't accept it. I can't, because I have to grade papers on the 14th, which is Monday, and hand grades in. Luckily, there's only 7 students in the class, and so I don't think it'll take me all day to do that. But don't hand this paper in late because I simply won't have time to include it in your grade. Okay. This is also a paper where you will not be able to revise it. Once it's in, it's in. And that's why you really need to work on the draft for the 11th, and you need to make sure you've made an appointment with me to talk about that draft, and then that you've got your paper handed in on time. You also need to make sure that you come to class on the 11th with the draft, because we'll have the Writing Center tutors with us, and that'll be your last chance to see those folks. Okay, so there's a lot to do in a short time. So please don't wait, because I am quite serious about this. I will not accept a paper after the due date for this assignment because there is no time. Okay, I'm sorry, but that's the way the calendar is set. I can't change that. So I'm looking forward to working with you, but please, again, make sure that you pay attention to the timeline, and that you get started early and you do the very best you can.